support partnerships with the Crop Trust. There's a strong connection between the conversation around land degradation we're having today and these weeks and plant diversity. Gene banks hold diversity that create more resilience, more nutritious crops, and more productive and are more productive in the face of drought, high temperatures, and poor soil. Today, we explore this topic from a multitude of interesting and diverse perspectives with our guests today who are leaders and experts and who can guide us through the challenges and opportunities, safeguarding our seeds and the future they represent. We will also get to look behind the scenes of the work from multiple different contexts and perspectives. What are the opportunities and challenges connected with the collection, storage, and distribution of genetically diverse seeds, securing funding for gene banks, and ensuring the availability of high-quality seeds? So by the end of this time together, we will have a good set of actionable, well, we hope to have a good set of actionable and tangible examples for bridging global, national, and local seed banks for climate resilience and community empowerment. So let's get started. The first person I would like to welcome to the stage is Dr. Michael Baum. Dr. Michael Baum is Acting Deputy Director General for Research and the Research Team Leader and Director of ICARDA's Biodiversity and Crop Improvement Program, which comprises 30 scientists and 67 technical staff, whose work ranges from crop breeding and cereal and legume pathology to virology and pollinators. And I just want to say, Michael, congratulations on the launch of your inspiring strategy today, which I'm going to shamelessly plug. This is just 2 hours old, CGIAR 2030, Global Strategy for Resilient Drylands, and a co-author is indeed ICARDA. The next person I would like to welcome up is Dr. Stefan Schmitz. Dr. Schmitz has been leading the Crop Trust as Executive Director since 2020. He previously worked as Deputy Director General and Commissioner for the One World No Hunger Initiative at the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, or BMZ, as some of you know. He also chaired the steering committee of the Global Agriculture and Food Security Program, whose abbreviation I won't read. For more than 10 years, Stefan led the food security, agriculture, and rural development work at BMZ. And prior to this, he held roles as a senior advisor to the Secretariat of OECD in Paris and various posts in the German Federal Administration in the area of geographical information systems, regional planning, and international cooperation on urban issues. And Stefan also happens to be a good colleague of mine. And finally, but not lastly, I would like to welcome Dr. Nasser B. Al-Mari to the stage, who is our guest and speaker today, but as well as representing our host, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Dr. Nasser, it is a great pleasure to have you here today. Dr. Nasser B. Al-Mari is the Director General of the Seed Center and Plant Genetic Resource Bank at the Saudi Arabian Ministry of Environment, Water and Agriculture, and Secretary General of the National Committee on Plant Genetic Resources. With over 20 years of experience, he is an expert in plant genetic resource conservation, research and development and policy, and committed to preserving the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia's agricultural biodiversity to ensure resilient and highly productive crop resources for the current and future generations. Thank you all for being here. It is a great pleasure and honor. And let's get into it. So starting with Michael. Michael, it would be wonderful to hear of your reflections on the topic of bridging gene banks from local to global and how international gene banks particularly can complement this work, and how can they do it potentially at the community level. It would also be great if you took a moment to reflect on the conversations and some of the other conversations you've been having at this COP.
I will try to do that. And yeah, I'm sorry that our colleague Zakaria couldn't make it, because you know, we're all a little bit affected by the SARS virus or some other virus. It's so I did actually yesterday a COVID test. I don't have COVID, but you know, we were last week in Dubai, and we all got a little bit sick, and so anyway. So from because I work very closely with Zakaria, I mean, who is the head of the ICARDA Gene Bank. And so that's why I know a little bit of the story. So from my perspective, well, you know, from my perspective, even before the CG was there and existing, the idea of generating an international network of gene bank was was there even before the centers. And today we see, so we have 14 international centers, and 11 of them, they have crop gene banks. And they happen to be in the center or at the edge of the centers of diversity of most of our food crops. Like for that purpose, ICARA, the location of ICARA in Syria was chosen because it's in the Fertile Crescent. And that's one of the the Vavilov centers where many of our crop varieties originated from, or still originating from, because you find the wild species in the field. So that's why that was the location for the gene bank. And actually, the gene bank network was actually one of the first active, collaboration across the CG centers. This community of practice between the gene banks existed way before we talked about one CGIAR, because because it's really important that those experts talk together, develop joint standards and principles, and yeah. So and as one of the international gene banks, it's really important to support the national programs in the region, and and I think the story of the Kala gene bank is actually one of it's tells you a lot of stories, because the international gene banks were created before the Doomsday gene bank in Norway was actually created. And so eventually the gene banks decided to use that one as a safety deposit, and all of the international gene bank deposited their collections in Norway, in Svalbard. And when ICARA located in Syria, when ICARA was attacked and we had to leave the country, we were the first center that repatriated their collection from Svalbard to regrow the collection. And that was actually not the original idea of the Svalbard, but so because at that time we had already safety duplicated 90% of our collection, so that's why it was the easiest to withdraw the collections from Svalbard and start regenerating, which we did over a period of 7 years or 8 years. So every year, 20,000 accessions. And so that after 7 or 8 years, we basically had multiplied and reduplicated all our collections, sent germplasm back to Svalbard, and had then an active stock. Because after we left Syria in 2012, we built new gene banks in Lebanon and in Morocco. International gene banks are very important to support the national gene banks in the region, because what happened to us also happened to many other gene banks in the region. For instance, the gene bank in Afghanistan was completely destroyed and looted. The gene bank in Syria, the gene bank in Iraq, and so if the international gene bank can be considered as a repository for the national collections, then the international gene banks have the ability to repatriate the national collections once they are needed. So we have done that for Afghanistan. So we have done that for Syria. We provided about 2,500 accession of the Syrian collections back to Syria. Afghanistan as well. We are also now talking in Iraq to support some of the local gene banks. Then, besides, of course, international gene banks provide training also for the national gene bank, because they're the whole science around how to conserve the genetic resources, and we do that on behalf of the custodian that have done these collections, and so we are then happy to provide also to provide training to national gene banks so that they again adequately can store maintain the germplasm. There's a whole issue around seed health testing, because when we provide germplasm, we test all the germplasm so to make sure there's no unintended distribution of pests and diseases. So these are all functions where the international gene banks can really provide support to the national communities, and then of course that's a function that we do for the gene banks in the region, and do the continuous support, and that's maybe as an opener, and enough for the story, and I'm happy to pass on to.
Thank you. You please do pass on the mic. Yeah, and I think it's on directly. That's thank you, Dr. Baum, for that intervention. And indeed, it seems like the role of international gene banks is also sharing those admittedly grave lessons learned, but making sure that standards and practices now are rigorous and consistent. So, Dr. Schmitz. Crop Trust is an international organization which certainly has a role in this coordination we're speaking about. How would you describe that role? And can you point to any tangible examples of initiatives that are striving to bring together these global actors, local, community, national, and international?
Thanks, Jana. Yeah, coming back to the general notion of gene banks. Michael already mentioned international gene banks. There are currently 19 of them recognized by FAO, 19, around 11 of them under CGIAR, plus 8 more on various places around the world. In this region, there is one other international one, that is ICBA, the International Center for Biosaline Agriculture. Then there is a Cartier Center in Costa Rica. There is one regional gene bank in the South Pacific, and around the world. So 19 international gene banks. For those who are more interested in that, they are specifically mentioned in this Article 15 of the International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture. So they are privileged in a way. Michael also mentioned national gene banks. And there are, or let's say, national and other important ones that make around 200 around the world that are important. Important, say, they have more than 10,000 accessions. FAO has registered more than 1,000 gene banks all over. And that goes then down to the local level. We also have tons of, and not many of them are not registered anyway. It is just local communities have them for their use. So we have the system of international. Imagine a world map with scattered 19 international ones, 200 national and other ones, and thousands of local ones. And there is one specific one also already mentioned, close the North Pole. This is the Svalbard Global Seed Vault, a very specific gene bank with just one purpose. It houses safety duplicates, just for cases of emergencies. If some seed banks around the world are on fire, are destroyed, an earthquake, or whatever. So that is, imagine this world bank, this world map with all those gene banks. Now, I mean, it is good, and this is a first step to make sure that they are all function on their own. But what a difference would it make if all those gene banks really work together? what a gain in effectiveness and efficiency if we succeed in bringing that all together. This is a vision, and we are just starting to do this. And as Joanna said, the Crop Trust tries to play a leading role in this. Of course, we can do it only together with all the partners, but we try to facilitate and orchestrate this a little bit. And there are a few, let's say, key elements that make sure that they are a system. The system is more than the sum of its parts. There is a glue to it, yeah, that brings it together. And what are key elements of such a glue? Well, things that comes first to my mind is standardized international information systems, yeah, for internal gene bank managers, so that gene bank staff knows where everything is, under what category. And so one example is the Green Global Community Edition standard. That is one thing the Crop Trust is working on, now applied by many gene banks around the world. And there is a gene bank system for the outside world. And this is even more important, because gene banks are not a museum. They only make sense if researchers and breeders around the world know what is in the gene bank, right? And that is a Genesis information system. So that is one thing that needs to be done. We started this years ago, making together with CGIAR, and there's great progress on this. Other things are, let's say, quality management. Yeah. So agree on certain standards of quality so that you can compare. That is part of the learning and training process. Then knowledge exchange, creating communities of practice, and knowledge sharing. We were currently thinking of some kind of building a gene bank academy, so a more formalized way of training gene bank staffs and all. Those are currently those areas we are working on. We regard them as most important to make sure that they all come together. Yeah. And we had last week, and this was also, we've been to Dubai last week, where we met with partners from various Article 15 collections, and also with partners from our national gene banks. And one of the representatives from our national is our colleague from Uganda. This is a huge program funded by the Norwegian government. We are currently working together with more than 20 national gene banks around the world. Yeah, so we make progress in bringing that all together. Yeah.
Thanks, Stefan. And I think it's quite a formidable, I would say it's a formidable exercise bringing together the information systems of multiple actors, global, as far as global, national, into this Genesis information system on plant genetics. I think it's a huge achievement and formidable. But also our work in connecting in situ and ex situ through projects like Boulder, to constantly be a little bit connection obsessed, maybe. Dr. Nasser Al-Mari, I understand that you might want to make a presentation.
Yes.
Okay,
Actually,
so
both of doctors contact with the Global International Bank, but today I'd like to talk about Saudi Gene Bank.
okay, wonderful.
To get some information, to get some numbers. But I think if possible
I'm going to
to-
do a quick
to
tech
stand.
check
Yeah.
with our technical colleagues. It's up
Yes,
here.
that's
Dr.
correct.
Nasser, would you like to take the
Yeah,
podium?
please. Okay. Can you please see this one? Welcome everybody. Actually, I'd like to talk about gene bank in Saudi Arabia. There is a lot of climate change effect of all land in Saudi Arabia and Gulf country and etc. You know, actually, we are really facing a hot temperature and difficult climate change. The Saudi Arabia contact of there is more than 2,208 99 plant. There is more than 855 genius. 9 of them from the seeds. There is more than 137 families. There is different. Yeah, there is some information. Actually, there is some aims of the gene bank in Saudi Arabia to support more farmers, to create a cooperation between the seed gene bank in Riyadh and the community gene bank in different city in Saudi Arabia. There is a cooperation between seed center and different organization in the world, in addition to get more focal point for seed center and gene bank with the other gene bank at different rather than city or countries. There is some information very important for seed center and gene bank as well to survey the seed center, the gene bank at different city in Saudi Arabia, like 13 different city. The city actually, the climate change different from city to another city. For example, at the moment 17 in Riyadh, but in Abha like 10. If you go to north, there will be the temperature is high or low. And to survey, to evaluation, to characterizes the seeds, the gene, some different plant in Saudi Arabia. Actually, at the moment, the gene bank have more than 3,200 genotype. We survey more than 1,500. Actually, the seed center contact consists of 3 rooms, -5 and +5 and -20. The samples more than 6,000 genotype at the moment, but the capacity will be more than 60,000. Actually, there is some numbers. There is some numbers about genotypes. The crops more than 599, and the we work with 240, and this will be make a catalog. The catalog will be appear and get to the farmer to this genotype. The fruit 372 and 44 fruit for vegetables. The committee production for seeds, especially for wheat. At the moment, the number of the wheat increase from 60 from this for bread wheat at the moment 559, durum wheat 50, and plant breeding we get generation number 4 at the moment, about 468. and legumes 57. In addition, we register 3 genotype of bread from local plant genetic committee. For 3, the name will Maya and Asir 1 and Asir 101. Asir 1 is bread wheat, and Asir 101 durum wheat. This some numbers of herbarium plant, more than 27,000 herbarium sample. They start from 1960 and until at the moment. They have 3 things: the samples and the references and the base of this numbers. In addition, we have more than 1,500 sample from fingerprint at the moment, and characterizes more than 1,533. Actually, the gene bank improved from Saudi gene bank to Gulf gene bank last year. And at the moment, we create the every single details about the policies, about the head of the employer in the GCC at the moment, GCC Gene Bank in Saudi Arabia and Riyadh. There is some cooperation between Seed Center and different city in Saudi Arabia. For example, like farmer, to build capacity of farmer. Al Medina 10 person, Asir 9, Abha 10, and Al Baha 10 as well. This under Minister of Environmental, Water and Agriculture. Actually, we spend with the farmer more than 3 years to improve every single details about to capacity building, improve capacity building, etc. This some workshop in the field or in the lab or workshop, etc. This some genotype, different city, different environmental condition, different city as well. This like catalog, when we get more information about every single details about the species, we create by catalog every single details about this catalog, and we will be give the farmer, the research center, etc. Every single details about for each one for catalog. For example, coffee have 79 genotype, wheat 23 genotype, for example, mango 81 genotype, etc. Fig, apple. This some like GPS map. This contact with gene bank in Riyadh and different gene bank. Like we have more than 9 gene bank at different city in Saudi Arabia at different environmental condition. And when we work with the seed center for grow any crops, we get the some result at different city, because to get more behavior of the grow of this plant for different city within different environmental condition. There's some publication from Seed Center, like biotechnology and different type of bread, wheat, etc. And thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nasser. Maybe if we can just sit up for 2 more minutes, because I want to ask last quick fire question. The question is, well, firstly, a reflection, Dr. Nasser, on your wonderful presentation. I think you've just given us an example of definitely that gap bridging, being this first Gulf gene bank coming from a Saudi gene bank national and then going up to this supranational as the first Gulf bank. That's quite a formidable achievement, but also maintaining that focus on farmers and making sure that they're at the table. So I just want to commend that. And I think I will ask you, I wanted to do one quick fire question, but Dr. Nasser, I wanted to ask you specifically, for others in national gene banks, or for others in international gene banks indeed, what are some pieces of advice that you might have for them to run a well-run international gene bank? And for the others, I'll ask a different question. I'll say, what is an area of plant diversity that we're not talking about so much and that you wish there was more emphasis on? But of course, Dr. Nasser, please also feel free to answer that question. And I'll pass you the microphone now.
Thank you so much for the question. Actually, gene bank in Saudi Arabia have a lot of things to improve to GCC bank, because there is more than 73 persons work in this gene bank. In addition, have branches at a different city in Saudi Arabia at different environmental conditions. That's why they get more genotypes. The capacity of the rooms will be able to more than 60,000 samples for each one. This more focus to improve for this gene bank.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Nasser. And Dr. Schmitz, my question for you is, and also for Dr. Baum, is there something that we're not talking about in the area of plant diversity that we should be putting more emphasis on? Is there something that's important that we haven't mentioned today?
Yes. Well, there are many things. I mean, we could discuss for hours here different aspects, but something perhaps we should underline here, and that came also out in this very great presentation by our colleague. On the one hand, wheat was mentioned, yes, as one really major staple crop, but on the other hand, many others. And I think it is not just the diversity within any species with various genotypes and various varieties that matters. You need that kind of diversity for breeding. But see also the other spectrum of diversity, having the broad variety of different kinds of crops, different kinds of crop species, and so. And perhaps we should all pay more attention to those huge variety. Yeah, a few have been mentioned here. Fruits and vegetables important. Yeah, your mango you mentioned as a very specific one, and apple and so. And that depends on the reason. And there are hundreds of different food crops and fodder crops we haven't looked at. We forgot in the course of history. They got somehow lost, got away from the radar. They sometimes have regional and local importance, but they will become more important in times of climate change. I am absolutely sure. You were talking about coffee. Some of the coffee varieties or coffee species, we will not be able to grow anymore in 20, 30 years from now. Yeah, so it is good to have the other coffee varieties. And then wheat, okay, it's good, but at the same time, there is sorghum, millets, alfalfa, teff, fonio, regional important, but we need first to make sure that also those kinds of crops are are securely conserved, and then that we really make use of it. Many of them are really so-called opportunity crops. Yeah, turn them from neglected crops, from orphan crops into opportunity crops. Some of them are less demanding when it comes to fertilizer or to water. They are better adapted to higher temperatures, to drought. And so we should pay more attention to this. And this is also something for the gene banks. And one more thing when talking about seed banks. On the one hand, they provide, as I said before, the raw material for breeding to improve the crops. But in some regions of the world, it is also important to bring to, how we say, repatriate it, simply bring diversity back to the farmers. And that is happening in particular when you're going further down to national and local level. So some of those very many interesting aspects around gene banks is absolutely fascinating. What we can do with them. We need them. Yeah, too many people simply take them for granted. It's like a sewage system. Yeah, anybody knows about it. They function, and so why should we care about it? It's the same with gene banks, but gene banks, they hold treasures. Yeah, and we should be aware of that and use it. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefan.
Yeah, I think everything was said. I would like to make the distinction between indigenous species and foreign species, because it's usually the indigenous species that are better adapted to the local conditions and the climate, and that can be really a national treasure, and but that's also something that can be collected and characterized, but also can be developed, and so as was said, I mean, we collect the germplasm in the gene bank, but if we want to make use of it, then we need to breed them. We need to develop them into, for instance, of species that are important, fodder species for animals, and really material that's very well adapted to these very harsh conditions in Saudi Arabia. So really an emphasis on the endemic species. Foreign species we can always bring in, and they are available and on demand, but often really not adapted to the very local and harsh conditions. And that's where the advantage of the endemic species. And so that's a whole new class of species that need to be collected, described, characterized, and eventually developed.
Thank you, Dr. Baum. So we will be having another panel discussion in the coming seconds, so please stay around. But I want to say a big thank you to Drs. Baum, Schmitz, and Elmari for your time here today and for your insights. I'd love if we could take a family photo very quickly, and then we move on to our next panel. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you. So we've had insights about the processes of running a national gene bank that has graduated to a regional gene bank. We've heard some of the processes. We've heard some of the regulations and the standards that we must adhere to when really getting to a level of quality that can be a model for those on the local and local scene wanting to graduate up to the national scene and so on and so forth. So now I'd like to welcome our next panel, which is a blend of online and in-person contributors with a variety of perspectives on the same topic today, coming from, again, from regional coordination to national perspectives to globally focused roles. I'll do a brief intro, but my intention here is to really hear about a day in the life of the people we're going to meet today and understand what challenges and opportunities they see in bridging these gaps that we've been talking about in this session. So I'd like to welcome Dr. Abdulaziz Niane from ICARDA, so our co-host, in fact, who is regional coordinator for the Arabian Peninsula Regional Program, or APRP for short. I'd like to welcome Dr. John Adrico, whose work, as well as being part of Crop Trust's supported Boulder project, he is Director of Research at the National Forestry Research Institute of the National Agricultural Research Organization, NARO, of Uganda. And I'm wondering if we have someone online. We do. So we are going to welcome very shortly Bettina Hyder. Hello, Bettina. Bettina Hyder is joining us remotely today. She is a genetic research specialist at the International Potato Center, or SIP. And Bettina, I think you're dialing in from Lima today. Oh, Bettina, it's the usual office jargon. I think you're on mute.
It's amazing that still happens after COVID and all those practice that we had in online meetings. I'm sorry.
Kind of
so good morning, everybody from Lima.
Volume issues on this side.
Can you hear me? I have a little bit of an echo.
Test.
You hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, good morning from Lima. I dial in from Lima, from the International Potato Center. Good morning, everybody, dear audience, distinguished panelists.
Just hold on, Bettina. Just bear with us. we have some unbelievably, I would say, Zen technical experts working on this. So now I'm testing. Now I can hear myself back, yeah, in a good way. And will I ask Bettina to do a sound check?
Yes, I can hear you. There's still a little bit of an echo, but I can deal with that.
We're just adjusting. We're just adjusting one more time. Yep. So I can hear myself back slightly. Do you think it's okay that we go into questions on this side and then we pull Bettina in a little bit? Bettina, while we're doing the sound check?
Yep, perfect.
Audio a little bit later. Okay, apologies to everybody about that disruption, but it's been handled by super professional experts. So I have no doubt we're going to have Bettina join us very shortly. But Dr. Abdulaziz, Dr. John Adrico, I have sort of a question for you both. We've just heard a little bit about perspectives on bridging the divide between local, national, and international. And the reason I didn't go through your bios when I mentioned your names coming up on stage is because I thought it might be interesting to hear your reflections on the roles you're currently in and how you are in your everyday or in your work you see the connections between local, national, and international. And also, what are some of the challenges or some of the opportunities you're seeing? So maybe I'll start with you, and then we bring in Bettina at the end. I'll pass you the mic.
Well, Joanna, thank you very much. Is this working? Is this working? Okay. Well, I started my career as a seed system specialist. To cut a long story short, I would like to subdivide my area into two main components. One is what we term formal sector, which was nicely covered by Michael and Stefan. And what we call in the seed system, in most of the cases, informal system, which is talking about the farmers struggling along the value chain of all the disciplines we are talking about. Of course, we know that plant breeding in the traditional way before Mendel was the farmers that were going collecting plants based on morphological characteristics, color, size, shape, earliness, you name it. Surprisingly, maybe, this is still continuing. The farmers are still struggling, and the formal sector is also working in a kind of a divide. Not the bridge is not very strong. In many cases, the seed which is produced by the community seed banks, in many cases now, is not allowed to be commercialized in many countries. It is outlawed. And definitely they have a lot of these values that people are talking about: the resilience, the resistance, the taste, the quality, and the food quality, what do you call it? But it lacks the volume. In many breeding programs, the main target in one way or another is yield. The quantity, how many tons per hectare. But rarely they ask the taste, the flavor, and so forth. So now, at the end of my career, I'm more focused on supporting community seed banks. I'm supporting now 3 community seed banks in Kenya. They are focusing on producing what they call traditional leafy vegetables, which are not really handled by the public sector, for example, by the private seed companies. Because for them also, they are focusing on the commercial aspects. And those crops that these community seed banks are focusing on, they are more adapted to the local conditions. They are more consumed by the local communities. They produce their food, and there are a lot of food items from those. And these things are very important in 2 aspects. One is, if we want really to maintain those crops and keep them alive for the future generations, then definitely they need to be supported by the farmer sector much more than it is happening at this moment. So when I went to Kenya 3 years ago, under the Nature Positive Solutions initiative of CGIAR, I visited few communities who are struggling to maintain and keep and preserve their local varieties. I asked them, what are your main challenges? They said access to appropriate technologies for extracting the seed, for cleaning the seed, for packaging the seed, for preserving and storing the seed away from the insects and so forth. And we worked with them for 3 years to really bring them up to a certain level with appropriate technologies, using local manufacturers to make threshers, cleaners, and dryers. And then we bought for them airtight jars to preserve their seeds. And now we are trying to characterize those local varieties so that the national system can integrate it and then recognize it. Because what they said when they would tell them that, can we register the farmer varieties, they said if they are characterized and identifiable, otherwise we will not do it. We are working with them in that aspect.
Thank you very much. So, what I'm hearing, please, if you wouldn't mind passing it to Dr. Ojukwu, but what I'm hearing is being very deliberate about supporting your community gene banks and dedicating time to supporting them and upgrading and listening also to their challenges and problems. Thank you so much. Dr. Ojukwu, the same question to you. A little bit of your day in the life, particularly, I think, your work also with the Boulder Project, and some of those moments where you see your role bridging that divide.
Thank you very much for the honor and the privilege to be here. I hope I can be heard. I don't hear myself. So John Adriko again is my name. I work for the National Agricultural Research Organization in Uganda. And I'll be talking a little broadly because I have evolved a lot in my career and responsibilities. I got into this conservation events from around about 2019, when I became a leader of the biodiversity and biotechnology program of the National Agricultural Research Organization in Uganda. And we're looking at conserving biodiversity, and it was broad, looking at improved crop varieties from the breeding systems, as well as indigenous or land races of the farmers. So this was being done and is being done at the National Gene Bank. However, the indigenous varieties or the indigenous crops of the farmers are conserved in the setting of what we call the community seed banks, are scattered across the country. There are 30, at least 30, some started by the National Agricultural Research Organization, others started by NGOs, but these have been networked presently through an information management system that links the community seed banks with the National Gene Bank, so that it's possible to know what is in the different community seed banks. So whatever diversity, but also SOPs for running the seed banks is in place, developed by the National Gene Bank, so that the community seed banks can use. And this network, the information system, doesn't only link the community seed banks with the National Gene Bank, but also links the National Gene Bank with the breeding pipelines. So there is communication in the gene bank with the breeders, as well as with the community seed banks. But there is also an interaction. Some of it has already been highlighted, the information systems that help the National Gene Bank to relate and coordinate with the others, the international gene banks. But there is also the safety duplication continually happening between the National Gene Bank and some of the regional gene banks, some of the CG gene banks, and also Svalbard. So that's what goes on in the area of conservation. However, the conservation has majorly what I would call the commercial crops, as mentioned earlier on. Our scope of conservation at the moment is low in Uganda. What's in the National Gene Bank is only around about 5,800 accessions, but more than half of this is the commercials, the maize, the common commodities, and we do not have what we call we have just about 2,500 of the neglected or underutilized species. So that's the situation of our conservation presently. I said I've been evolving a bit. From about August, I became the director of the Forestry Resources Research Institute in Uganda. Then my aspiration, my inspiration, my motivation turned to trying to conserve forest resources. And I coordinate the Boulder. I will talk about Boulder and Boulder that we're involved in a little while. But in the plans and development of the Boulder, one of the things that for me was very interesting was to have trees, at least in the groups in Africa. One of the identified genetic resources is a tree in each of the countries. And in Uganda, we have the jackfruit. It's the one being fronted for conservation. It's a complex system because the national gene banks mostly focus on the grains, the seed. Actually, the vegetatively propagated crops tend to lack in in the support in gene banking, and also the trees, they tend to be disadvantaged. But I think it's something that for me, I am motivated to pursue and undertake. With ICRAF, C4 ICRAF, the initiatives already in place to start to do localized, or I would say community field gene banking of the shea tree, of the sandalwood. So that's an approach that's working. Of course, it's under development and it's on the farmer fields. We do not know how sustainable this can be. Farmers can change their minds on what to do. That could be another challenge of this field gene bank approach. However, the structuring of the National Agricultural Research Organization is in such a way that you have the zonal agricultural research and development institutes, which have vast land. So that's another consideration we are having. Instead of just conserving on the farmer fields, the trees can be conserved on those zonal research institutes, just to be sure that you will have them in the next 20, 30 years. So those are some of the areas. In BOLD, the BOLD Work Package 1, we've been involved in capacity building of our gene bank, the operations, quality management system, information management system. By the time the CropCrust team visited, the consultants visited to really identify the capacity needs, we had vast capacity needs, ranging from space to human capacity to technical capacity, different ways. And CropTrust has really supported in building the capacity of our team in the information management system, in the seed handling and processing, and that is greatly appreciated. And so the project is moving on and it's getting better. The other bit has been the space constraint of our gene bank. I told you we had about only 5,800 accessions conserved, and this is already full. The gene bank is full, and this is just about 11% of our entire diversity in the country. So we've gone through initiatives. Of course, CropTrust has helped us to try to create more space within our existing gene bank, to have more accessions collected and conserved. But with Alliance Biodiversity International and CGIAR, we've come up with a concept of a bigger, vast regional gene bank that could be able to take up to 100,000 accessions. And we're looking at, beyond the national collection, the possibility of safety duplicating for the other countries. So that's an initiative. We've come up with concepts and we've come up with the design. And so at the moment, jointly, we are moving around doing the resource mobilization to realize this dream. And there is the buy-in from the East African ministers of agriculture. There is a buy-in from the African Seed and Biotechnology Association. So there is a buy-in. But now what we are pursuing is the resource to be able to actualize this desire. So that's a bit of the many things that I'm involved in. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rodrigo. Please keep the mic as we'll be using it in a little bit. But I really appreciate when someone speaks about their personal evolution and their personal process. Sometimes we get into the work, but obviously we're humans and we're connected to the work. And I think your emphasis on tree conservation as well is very pertinent to the conference that we're at, given the importance of trees for land degradation. And I think what I'm hearing from you, at least, is we have to walk hand in hand. It's you cannot only, but it's very important to give the information, the protocols, share, make the information available, but also to guide, to be a thought partner, and be speaking at multiple levels, which it sounds like you've been doing. So thank you so much for sharing that. I'm going to move over to Bettina and from SIP, who's been waiting very patiently online. And Bettina, the same question to you, which is, you know, how do you see, and again, I think we're coming at very different angles, which is very rewarding, in fact, because we're seeing things from multiple perspectives. But how do you, in your work, see your contribution to the bridging of local, national, and international? And please feel free to speak about your broader work also.
Yes, I think at SIP we've been working for decades now. We have a long history of engaging in situ conservation with local communities, or what we called custodians of potato diversity. That reflects a little bit the cultural background that we have here in Peru, in the center of origin and domestication of potatoes, so that the diversity that communities or even families hold is so immense that it is difficult to work with community seed banks, for example, because we would need a multitude of them. But what we have seen is working quite well is to engage with networks, association, or somehow organized custodians of potato diversity. So these give us the chance to support in situ conservation, and that requires a lot of personal commitment and time effort. We've heard that before. You need to build up a relationship of trust, so that the communities are open for collaboration and also for knowledge and seed sharing. But from an institutional side, I think it is important for us to see that an integrated conservation approach is the way to go for the gene bank as much as the communities. So we've had for a long time in situ conservation on the one hand and ex situ conservation in the gene bank on the other hand, and we've just really been able this year to change the SIP strategy towards an integrated approach in which the gene bank has both sides of conservation, the in situ and the ex situ, embedded as an integrated conservation approach. And in this, the GBank supports the communities and the custodian farmers in many ways. So we help them set up inventories, create catalogs on their diversity so that they know what's actually out there. We've been working on joint projects looking into genetic gap analysis, what's actually out there in the fields. Is it well represented in the gene bank? If not, is it possible to integrate it into the gene bank? We have 20 years of repatriation, so that means farmers have the opportunities to approach the gene bank and request seeds that they have lost. So that is restoring and repatriating potato diversity to communities. And we've also been engaging with policy incidenting, advocating, and farmers' rights and farmers' role and their importance in situ conservation, because in a place where diversity is so immense, we cannot get everything in situ in the gene bank. And we also don't want that, because we see that the environment is changing. We face new challenges, and farmers respond to that with continuous breeding efforts and also with an evolution of the seeds and the varieties that they maintain. So it is important that we have those both ends tied together. I think it is both that we can do the long-term vision of ex situ conservation, giving the farmers a chance to safety back up their seeds, but also to repatriate that. And we've done that for 20 years now, and we have been repatriating, I think, more than 25,000 seeds to farmers that for clonally propagated crop is quite a high number. And we've been also engaging a SIP in training on farmers' rights and opportunities in terms of access and benefit sharing. Yeah, and engaging the wider community, which is quite important because I think we heard that before also. We need more involvement of the society and maybe also of the government as such, because those farmers who keep these varieties also for the good of wider communities or even humankind, they need support. They need more funds, and they need some fair benefit sharing that arise as a very tangible result from the conservation efforts. So I'm having echo again. Wait a second. And we've been working and helping them on starting. Have been starting with one of the custodian farmers associations in helping set up some little seed funding. And by the time the association has grown, the support has increased, and from bilateral support in very small amounts, or even from potato seed companies that have given some money into the funds of these association. It has moved on now to at least a higher awareness and some support of the municipalities that give funds into this to support the conservation, because we have to be clear, we do have a lot of options in those seeds. There are the answers to future climate change challenges, but we also see that the society is changing, and that the farming communities are changing. Younger people move out of agriculture, and that creates also an impact on the diversity that is being conserved. So we need to find more incentives, and for example, that is created through these benefit sharing funds that we try to support and to lobby and to advocate, but also through engaging a wider community through citizen science, working with schools on kids, raising awareness. That's a huge amount of the work that we do, and of course, as I said, these relationship with communities and the support that the GBank can give to these communities is built on trust, and it has to be both ways, from the GBank to the farmers, or the farmer communities, and from the farming communities into the GBank. I think that is an approach that has been working, but we would actually also need a little bit more of support for the conservation efforts that we do, and the support for the community support, and the community seed system support, because it's generally what is ring-fenced in the funding of the GBank is the mere conservation of ex situ, not so much the reaching out and the integration of the national or even the community seed banks. And I think we need to get better there.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I think it was the first time the word, but certainly the explicit word, but I think it has been running through this discussion. The word trust has come up, and it's trust with farmers, it's trust with the community with whom you're working. But I indeed have heard that in most interventions today, though, Bettina, I think you said it explicitly, and I think you mentioned even in your work being adaptive to change, the change you're seeing in society, the change you're seeing in family dynamics, and the change that you're seeing in climate, and how that's impacting your work. I'm sure that's bittersweet, in fact. You know, because you want to conserve, and then you're saying, I must adapt with the reality we see in front of us. And I think it's very pragmatic. And the way you described it was quite pragmatic. And I think also, I just want to reiterate what you focused on, which is the circular nature of conservation, which is farmers can request the seeds that they have lost, there's repatriation. Not only are we doing safety backups, but we are repatriating, and then there's a cycle. Once again, all related to interconnectivity. Thank you so much to the panel. I asked you to keep the mic because I've got one rapid fire, but I am conscious of time, and we have one short presentation, which is by Claudio, which is coming up next. But I couldn't leave without, if it could be a 1 or 2 word answer, that would be hugely appreciated. But again, is there something that we're not talking about that we should be talking about? In the area of plant genetic resources and the conservation of plant genetic resources, what should be top of our agenda that maybe hasn't been so much top of our agenda?
Thank you very much. I think I already mentioned what should be really top in the agenda. Can we look at the trees? Can we look at the vegetatively propagated going down into the communities? So that's, for me, the thing to look at going forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Strengthening the linkages between the formal and informal to uplift the farmer community-based seed systems up, to play their critical role in maintaining the agrobiodiversity.
Thank you. And Bettina.
Yeah, I can sign all of that, what has been said. From my point in SIP and pre-breeding, and also being aware of Boulder, I'd say more work on crop wild relatives would be just on my top agenda. That involves also the communities, because they have a certain way of managing the wild species in different ways and creating a gene flow between the crop and the wild species.
Well, huge thank you to our panel. I really appreciated those insights. We will be moving over to Claudio, who will give us a presentation on the role of the plant treaty in all of this, because I think that's not, we haven't really touched on the legal framework. So we'll stay for Claudio's presentation. We're going to take a few questions and answers, but I would love a family photo. If we can maybe get Bettina up on the screen here, that would be amazing. I wonder if that's possible. Can we spotlight Bettina on this? Wonderful. Let's do it. Thank you. Please, thank you so much for your amazing interventions. Okay, last but not least, we have Dr. Claudio Chiarolo. He is the legal officer at the Alliance of Biodiversity International and CGIAR. And he's going to speak to us about the role of the plant treaty. So essentially, that holds our work together in facilitating collaboration between global, national, and local gene banks. Claudio, please take it away.
Thanks so much. I hope you can hear me fine. Thank you very much for the opportunity to join you remotely. I'll be providing a quick overview about the plant treaty, which is the longer name is the FAO International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources, Food and Agriculture. Maybe some of you might not know it. How we work within the framework of the plant treaty as CGIAR centers, and then how all this connects at different level with national and community seed banks as well, and areas for further work. So first of all, there's 11 centers within CGIAR that maintain and trust collections of staple crops and agroforestry trees. Obviously, those are very important. We operate within the framework of the plant treaty because we have agreements with the governing body under Article 15 of such treaty. So interest collections, as well as materials from the breeding programs, can be transferred within the multilateral system of access and benefit sharing that is established by the treaty. So this treaty was adopted partly as a response to the Convention on Biological Diversity, where users researchers and anyone who wants to do research and development with genetic resources has to enter into a bilateral agreement with the provider country, establishing some terms for benefit sharing on bilateral basis. And obviously, this is very different from what works and what is needed for the agricultural sector, where there's a high level of interdependence among all countries because nobody is self-sufficient in terms of plant genetic resources of food and agriculture, and where also there's a high intensity in terms of the needed international exchange in order to identify characteristics and traits that can be helpful to adapt again to emerging pests and diseases, to changing climate, and of course to water scarcity, which is of course very relevant for the convention. So this treaty was adopted in 2004. In 2001, it came into force in 2004. It has presently 152 countries. And it covers, of course, of plant genetic resources of food and agriculture. However, specifically in the multilateral system of the treaty, there's a narrower set of resources, which is limited to those that belong to Annex 1. That's 64 crop and forage species that are particularly important for food security for the time being. So this multilateral system, from the point of view of access, makes sure that providers can make the germplasm available to any person or organization for research, breeding, and training for food and agriculture. And this is provided free of costs or only with a minimal cost. And also access takes place in a standardized manner through what is known as the Standard Material Transfer Agreement, which is a standard contract that was negotiated and adopted once for all by the governing body of the plant treaty. From the point of view of benefit sharing, users of this multilateral system, those who receive materials under the Standard Material Transfer Agreement, are expected to contribute a part of commercial benefits obtained through the commercialization of new plant genetic resources for food and agriculture. And these benefits go to the so-called benefit sharing fund under the treaty if certain conditions for the payments are met. These I already highlighted it before. Main thing is the multilateral system for now is limited only to 64 crops and forage species. However, importantly, the contracting parties are currently negotiating a package of measures to enhance the functioning of the multilateral system. And as part of that, it is under discussion to extend potentially the scope to all plant genetic resources of food and agriculture, including, for example, fruit trees and all the other species that are not yet included. So this is part of the expansion and enhancement of the functioning of the multilateral system. And such enhanced multilateral system will have to be adopted by the next meeting of the governing body in November 2025, if the negotiations proceed well. Now, with respect to CGIAR, importantly, the treaty also provides for farmers' rights in Article 9, including three main components that relate to the participation of farmers in decision-making, participation of farmers in the sharing of benefits, as well as the protection of their traditional agricultural knowledge. And we have adopted principles in the CGIAR with respect to the implementation and upholding of these rights. We've also developed implementing guidelines, and those implementing guidelines emphasize in particular the need to ensure prior informed consent of farmers when providing materials that goes into gene banks, involving them as partners in research and development projects, building and promoting their local institutions and practices in research and development, raising awareness about availability of other PGRFA from gene banks in the multilateral system, and a variety of other important items. In terms of working with the farmers, CGIAR facilitates access to germplasm, facilitate participatory plant breeding, as well as on-farm conservation and management of agrobiodiversity, across to strengthening the farmer seed systems, developing market and value chains, and through participatory socioeconomic research. So it's a whole loop of related activities that reinforce one another. Also importantly, the work of CGIAR focuses on also strengthening the linkages that was mentioned earlier by previous speakers between international, national, and community seed banks. So specific projects have, for example, contributed to the establishment of at least 80 community seed banks. There's 56 other seed banks that are being currently supported and in the process of being established. And we have 10 community seed bank networks in 29 countries across Africa, Asia, and Latin America that we work with. In terms of seeds distributions to a broad grouping that includes farmers groups as well as NGOs, we distribute approximately 8% of the total of materials that goes to users outside of CGIAR to farmers groups. And this number is an average for the past 4 years. And then in 2023, that has grown up to 12.5%. So it's a positive sign. This is, of course, a percentage of the total number that is about 50,000 accessions distributed per each year across these different groups. Importantly, in this context, I'd like to highlight, before drawing a conclusion, also on the plant treaty's contribution to mobilizing resources for national and community seed banks. I'd like to highlight the fact that one issue that is particularly important and that has arisen in the context of the enhancement of the multilateral system is the issue of direct distribution to farmers for direct use. So one of the important elements of the treaty that defines its scope is that these materials that are shared through the standard material transfer agreement are provided for the purpose of training, research, and breeding. So obviously there can be training for farmers, and that's okay. But if somebody wants to directly use materials that are already, for example, the select materials that are well adapted and wants to use them without modifying them, in principle, that shouldn't take place through the standard material transfer agreement. And it is an open issue if somebody can just use directly in production system, or if, for example, if a small private company has to intervene for the multiplication in order to provide, propagating material that is free of pests and diseases. And, this is very common, for example, for banana plants. You need a private company to intervene to do the multiplication before you can distribute to farmers for growing. So in that case, there's a sort of gray area that hopefully will be discussed and allowed also under the plant treaty with the enhancement, with the enhanced multilateral system, could be catered for within the allowed uses under the standard material transfer agreement. But that is not yet decided, as I mentioned earlier. So looking now actually at the financial resources mobilized through the benefit sharing fund of the treaty, there's good results overall. The benefit sharing fund has invested in 108 projects in 78 developing countries, reaching more than 1 million people since it became operational in 2009. It supports also breeding efforts that include participatory plant breeding. 31,000 PGRFA have been tested, co-developed, and adapted to different local agroecological environments. And also 170 repositories of local seed diversity have been established through this type of funding, facilitating increased access to diversity of seeds. And 200 farmer feed schools have been used to undertake research and deploy climate-resilient crops. So the current benefit sharing fund portfolio is the fifth project cycle that is being executed. It has a budget of more than 10 million USD allocated to 28 different projects, which are single country and multi-country projects. So this is what is currently going on.
Hello.
And with that, I finish my presentation.
Okay,
Over to you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Claudio. And we just really quite important. We started guarantee of conservation skills, sustainability, and resources, also to be farmers at the center. We heard before that we've heard stories of safety implications, other practices that we shared in Europe together with six walking hand in hand with communities and community groups, sharing best practices, but also connecting the dots. Is it easy? No.
Is rocket science? Absolutely not either, but it is time intensive. So the conclusion today is that it requires all of us to bridge those gaps. Thank you very much. And thanks to everybody who listened in and who's speaking today.